Hey folks, welcome to Strenuous Conversations. This is Ryan, the man who would be knight. This is our episode 3. Episode 1, we talked about Josef Pieper's book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. We started chapter 1 in episode 1. Episode 2, we moved on to chapter 2, but we didn't quite finish it. So in episode 3, we'll be finishing chapter 2. I got some feedback on previous videos. Some folks found it a little bit distracting the way the format was. So I'd be doing a set of exercise, then talk a little bit about the book, then do the next set of exercise, talk about the book, and so on and so forth. Well, they found that the interruptions in the discussion was kind of distracting. And since they're not following along the exact same workout I am, it made it more difficult for them to listen to it as a standalone podcast. So we're going to try it a little differently. I'm going to go through my workout. The workout that I'm doing is posted below. I've switched it up to one-arm swings throughout the whole set, and I'm going to try and work up to one-arm push-ups throughout the whole set, but probably not quite there yet. And then once I've finished with that, then we'll get started on talking about this book. So let's get after it. All right, workout's complete. Had a few technical glitches in the middle of it, specifically my computer started acting a fool, which it's still doing. Just shut down. Just go to sleep. Yeah. So yeah, a few technical glitches. Computer's not behaving the way I want it to. It is glitching and starting and stopping and makes it look like I've got epilepsy, which I don't. So it took a little bit longer to go through the workout, so we're going to talk about the book while I'm stretching because I got life to get to. All right, so chapter 1, why are we talking about leisure? Just to recap, because Western civilization was built on leisure. Giving this lecture at the beginning of the Cold War, everybody in his audience is 100% focused on let's rebuild our economy. So work, 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 keep the nose to the grindstone, get things done. Pieper is saying, hang on folks, right now we are not literally starving to death. Most of us have at least enough food to get through the week. So let's take a step back and really think about what we're trying to build here. Are we trying to build Western civilization, a Western culture? If so, we have to come to terms with leisure. So then he moves into chapter 2 and he starts talking about the intellectual worker as the culmination of a long history of what he calls the triumph of the worker. And of course, everybody listening to this at the time knows exactly, or has an easy target for this. Right across the river, there's East Germany. Beyond that is Poland, which is rapidly falling under communist domination. And beyond that is Russia, which everybody knows is 100% communist at this point. And they are literally trying to build the workers' paradise, a planned society in which everybody is a worker and everybody works towards the goals of the state. So Pieper identifies the fact that they've been able to take a philosopher. Up until now in Western civilization, the philosopher is regarded as the one guy who's fortunate enough that he doesn't have to work. He can spend all his time thinking about the deep secrets of the universe and the meaning of life and all this jazz. They've taken that, what was a hobby of a privileged class, and they have turned it into a profession. The philosopher is now an intellectual worker. The last holdout of a leisured culture has been subsumed by the planned state. How did they do that? He identifies 2 concepts that we talked about in the last episode. First, the belief that the only source of philosophic truth is work. You have to work for it. Intuition means nothing. Stroke of genius means nothing. You have to think your way to things with discursive reasoning, which means reasoning that follows a step-by-step path. There's no flashes of genius, there's no insight, and certainly no revelation per se. The second step is, once you've made this step, you say, well, then the how hard I work on this train of thought is my marker of how reliable my answer is. If it came to me like that and it's super easy, I suspect it. I don't believe that that's the truth. If I had to work for it, that's automatically more valuable. Open up those hip flexors. So those are the first two trends that he identified, and the third we're going to finish up the chapter with is that the intellectual worker is now a social functionary. It's a social service. What does that mean? In a planned state or in a state of total work, everyone is a functionary of the social system. From the ditch digger and the porta-john cleaner to the philosopher. The philosopher has finally joined the noble ranks of the peasant worker, of the proletariat, by one, basing his worth on how hard he works, on how much effort he puts into it, taking that effort as the criteria of the worth of his work, and then putting that work at the service of the social system, the social planned system. So the philosopher ceases to be somebody who pursues truth for its own sake, who pursues what he believes and spends his life, dedicates his life to abstractly pursuing the truth. And he becomes somebody at the service of a system where what he is pursuing has to fall in line with party doctrine. Now this, you may be like, oh, well, that's awful for them. That sucked to be a philosopher in Russia in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Well, yeah, but we're not quite done with that system yet. So he also says that with philosophy has come all of the arts: painting, poetry, writing, the cinema, acting, all of these things. They now become tools. Instead of an artist seeking to express the good, the true, and the beautiful, they are now tools to express the party line. If you think that this is not going on today in the Free West, I would encourage you to take a deeper look. I don't know how familiar you are with academia, but a good chunk of academia in modern America is now at the service of an ideology. There's a difference, 2020 versus 1920, 1940, 1960. The difference is that this ideology, the philosophies that kind of guide who gets tenure and who doesn't get tenure, who gets published and who doesn't get published, who gets well peer-reviewed and who doesn't, the ideology is no longer a state ideology. It's not planned by the state, but there is an ideology. The same is true of music. So who makes it big in the music industry, who makes it big in the entertainment industries, who makes it big wherever. We'd like to think it's solely based on talent and popular appeal, but that's not entirely the case. As with anything else, it's a question of not what you know, but who you know. Is it 100%? No. We still have room for indie movies. We still have room for indie pop groups and independent music makers and independent thinkers. There's always room for that in our Western system, thanks in large part to our free press and platforms like this, like YouTube, where anybody can take an iPhone camera, set it up on their living room, on a table in their living room, and make whatever music they want. And if it's good enough and they're good at marketing themselves, then people will listen. So we're not at that 100% planned society, but there is an element in which we expect our philosophy and our arts to be at least at the service of an ideology. We expect everything to be politicized, which is unfortunate. Sometimes an artist just wants to tell a story. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1000, 1003, 1004, 1002, 1003, 4, 2, 3, 1004, 2, 1003, 1004, 2, 1004. So, philosophy, the arts, the sciences are now at the service of a planned social system. They've taken the liberal arts and turned them into servile work, meaning what used to be done as an amateur, so amateur comes from the same root as amat, to love. An amateur is a lover, one who pursues what he does because he loves it, compared to a professional, one who does what he does because he is paid for it, or because he is putting it at the service of some utilitarian end. When you take the philosopher and you make him a functionary, you take what is a liberal art, you turn it into a servile work. He has to philosophize. Not only that, Pieper doesn't really
express this in so many words, but it's kind of there in the subtext, is that he has to philosophize in such a way that his results are in line with the intent of the person who's paying his bills. If they're not, that person just doesn't pay his bills, and he starves. So he brings up Aquinas' definition of the liberal arts versus servile work. Only those arts are called liberal or free which are concerned with knowledge. Those which are concerned with utilitarian ends are attained through activity are called servile. So the philosopher pursuing philosophy for its own sake, the researcher, the scientific researcher, who may not necessarily have any particular end in mind when he's looking at his microbes under a microscope, he's just really interested in microbes and just really wants to know what makes these microbes tick. Neither Aquinas and Newman also, John Cardinal Henry Newman, in the idea of the university, he contrasts these two branches of knowledge, the practical from the liberal, and he calls it the knowledge of the gentleman. I'll take a step back here and say that I'm not quite 100% on board with Newman's definition of a gentleman, if you've ever read Idea of the University. Topic for another conversation, but Pieper kind of subscribes wholesale to his idea of the gentleman, and I kind of have some reservations. But nevertheless, he does quote him saying that the philosophy of the gentleman is contrasted with knowledge directed to practical ends. Neither Aquinas nor Newman are denying that knowledge pursued for its own sake may then be directed to practical ends. So, old boy looking in his microscope, because he just loves microbes and wants to know what makes them tick, he may not have intended this, but he may stumble upon the discovery of penicillin, which then becomes a practical end, the making of penicillin. And then we may start doing practical research, which is designed specifically to answer a technological question. How do we develop penicillin quickly and cheaply? Same way the philosopher, thinking, sitting in his French cafe with his beret and his scarf on, positing that, existence precedes essence, and most people are like, what does that even mean? Well, you have Jean-Paul Sartre, who then becomes the voice of an entire wokeness movement, or at least a good chunk of it. My idea of myself, my choice, precedes what I was made to be. Nothing is given. I define my own reality. Ideas have consequences. The philosopher sitting there just kind of blindly following this train of logic, for good or ill, it may indeed have some consequences, but the consequences are not what he's after. What he is not thinking in order to change his world. He is thinking in order to discover the truth. So this has been turned upside down in a world of total work. So Pieper calls it into question that this bringing the philosopher into line with social functioning, this calls into question the whole purpose of a university. What is a university for, or an academy for? Is it to train a functionary? To teach somebody how to do philosophy or to do their art in such a way that they can be of service to the state, or to the academy, or to a political party, or to the Oscar? I don't know, what are the Oscars chosen by? Are they chosen by an academy? I guess there are Academy Awards. Okay, so yeah, service to an academy. Is the artist, the philosopher, the scientist simply a functionary now? Because if they're functionary, then we're going back into the Greek world where functional work was done by slaves. That's why it's called servile work. It's the work of the slave. Slaves are trained to perform a simple function as a cog in a piece of a bigger machine. Or is the university to train humans in the fullness of their humanity if you're talking about training a human in the fullness of their humanity, can you really define humanity exhaustively by their function? Can you look at this guy and say, you're a ditch digger? That is all you are. Your entire existence is circumscribed by the fact that you dig ditches. Your entire worth is based on how well you can dig this ditch for the state, for your boss, for a company, for an industry. Or do we have to look beyond that and say, oh, this man digs ditches, and while he digs ditches, he thinks about philosophy. He thinks about what's true. Why am I digging this ditch? The moment he starts asking the question of why am I doing this function, he's trying to put his function into a larger context that is not given him. It's a context that he's trying to discover for himself. Is a full human experience possible outside of a function? Pieper says, no, it's not. But the planner of a planned society says, yes, it has to be. The moment you start looking outside of your function, outside your little box that you're given, at that moment, you cease to be bound by the box and you become a dangerous, free radical roaming around society now. And what Pieper does is he encourages us to look outside of those boxes, to say, maybe you're not just a function. So he has to ask this question: is anything that is not immediately useful, meaning immediately directable towards a utilitarian end, is it therefore useless? Like, is it useless to contemplate? I can't see any immediate use for it, but the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean it's useless. So Aquinas would point out that it is not only good, but it is necessary for society to have some dedicated to living the contemplative life. It's necessary to have people doing research as a hobby because they love it, because they're going to pursue truth wherever it leads them, and they're going to find truths that the person following this narrow track down this one towards this one end is going to miss. But that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because they love it. It is necessary that they do it because they love it. But if we allow them that space, if society is so constructed that it allows them that space to do it, then benefits will accrue to society eventually. And that's all we have time for today. That kind of brings us to the end of chapter 3. So we're going to hit up one more set of pull-ups and call it good. 1001, 1002, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1002, 1002. All right, y'all have a great day. See you next time.